And hello, we are live from Berlin, from Plan A offices. And today I have Lubomila Jordanova, the CEO and co-founder of Plan A, also the co-founder of cleantech Alliance. She'll be getting into this topic quite soon as well. But why we did this broadcast or this event is to bring to the audience we have are corporates, investors, public authorities, as well as startups, the innovators. So we are bringing to you what has happened in clean tech sector or climate tech sector, now more popular. What has happened in 2021, why 2021 was so monumental, and what can we expect actually in 2022 onwards? Where should the kind of startups go to? What should they emphasize on? How to avoid greenwashing? What should the investors look into, as well as the corporates? How can they put their guns into play if they're really tackling the climate change issues and want to, address the SDGs, the CSR, the ESGs, and all those topics so crucial for our future and for our future economies. First of all, my name is Erki Ani. I'm the co-founder of Plan A and Accelerator. We're helping very early stage startups get founder-friendly financing and accelerator program to advance and scale up their impact Europe-wide. As well as I'm a CEO at cleantech Estonia, so we are doing everything that we can to help Estonian cleantech startups develop their products, scale their activities, and do it together with the public authorities. As such, now Lubomila, I'd like you to also introduce to the audience yourself. But first of all, where did you come from? What has turned you into this very visionary kind of a front runner and a speaker and a person that you are today?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to kick off here. I'm sure of a lot of events at which I'm going to be speaking with this one. What got me here was definitely not my formal education or career path. Up until 6 years ago, I was working in finance, and also this is what I've studied. So I used to be in investment banking. I was also in VC, then in fintech as my last time before Plan A. And actually a lot of serendipity brought me to what I'm doing today, because in 2016, I found myself facing firsthand climate change on a trip that was supposed to be a holiday, but turned out to be, I would say, also like the word you use, monumental. For my own experience, I ended up cleaning beaches instead of surfing. And on this 10-day stunt, I got myself thinking a lot about what is actually the impact of people on our planet, how are we thinking of ourselves in the context of climate change. And after this trip was done, the thought still stayed with me, and essentially what I ended up doing was spending close to a year educating myself about climate change. And then 2017, I felt comfortable and knowledgeable enough to really kick off my own company, which was particularly focused on connecting the dots between stakeholders and allowing them to make better decisions that are also good for the planet, not only for profits.
And in terms of stakeholders, in Plan A's perspective, those stakeholders are the corporates, the larger corporates that you help with Plan A to address their ESGs and the tools. Can you kind of quickly elaborate on that as well, what Plan A does particularly?
Of course, yeah. So Plan A is now a 4-year-old company which has developed a software that enables businesses to monitor their carbon and ESG performance and essentially learn how to improve that. How does this happen? We use science and machine learning to enable businesses to really automate the data process assessment and then based on whatever has been analyzed to get automatically a prescription on how they can improve. So based on their worst performing indicators, they get suggestions on how they can improve, and they reduce their emissions significantly within a year. We do that definitely with a lot of corporates. This is the main target group that we have, but as I'm sure our conversation is going to lead us, we truly believe that the actual innovation and impact for our planet happens when there's engagement of different stakeholders, which is why we have corporates as clients, but we also enable them to connect to innovators, NGOs, and other types of stakeholders that can help them amplify their impact.
Okay, that's good. That's very good. I'm gonna now let's switch the topic. Today as well, actually, maybe 15 minutes ago, ended the cleantech for Europe's summit. They have this annual briefing summit on what kind of happened, what happened in cleantech in 2021, and what can we expect as well. So there's more on the EU scale. From the Commission, from World Fund, from the Breakthrough Energy Ventures, etc., etc. But there was one thing that kind of sticked with me. The Vice President for Europe's Breakthrough Energy, Anne Mettler, said that we're good at planning the wedding, but we're less good at planning the marriage. And she implied that in the context of what we have actually done and what the 2021 was. So what do you think, what was it actually that gave boost in 2021 for the climate tech sector, like for the huge growth? Because we know now that in 2021, the investments in the clean tech sector in seed, Series A, B, C, and growth stage amounted to 11 billion euros. And previously, in the previous years, it has been more like 4.8 billion euros in 2020 and 4.6 in 2019. So we kind of saw the doubling of that amount. What do you think? You were like hands-on in this sector as a startup's perspective, but also from the Green Tech Alliance perspective, and you were very engaged also at COP26 in Glasgow.
I think the last few years have really allowed people to understand what are the negative implications of climate change on a governmental, on a societal, on an economic level, which has strengthened finally the vision for using technology to enable this transition to a more sustainable model. Many stakeholders finally realize that we're never going to be able to actually pay the climate bill without having technological improvements along the way, and without necessarily solely focusing on technology as our solution, like the promise of direct air capture and other types of solutions that maybe might feel like one size fits all kind of an approach to addressing climate change. Technology in its multitude really can allow for the optimization and to some extent the shortcutting of our road to becoming sustainable. This is what I think influenced a lot this increase in investment, and I feel like COVID, for so many people, it was also a preview of what could it mean if we experience a global disaster that is influencing essentially every single stakeholder, every single actor in our society, while also diminishing the possibilities for our economy to really act in the normal way as we think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so definitely kind of the public sector advancements and the popularity grew. We saw a lot of, as we saw a lot of investment, that doesn't mean that there was, new investors that actually, that suddenly or instantly had their heart turned green, right? Or some kind of a conscience was found. But they're rather following the trend, the fear of missing out trend also, which is very familiar in the VC sector. Following this, that there's many new players, many World Fund, the climate funds, clean tech oriented funds, etc. But there's also a lot of generalist funds that don't take green tech as a separate category, but now are more looking into that. This also kind of poses the threat, in my opinion, that there could be quite a lot of greenwashing if there's not, if the investors who are doing the due diligence, A, they don't have too much to provide for those climate tech entrepreneurs, and B, they might not know what is actually being, developed in this sector that the startup is active in.
There's two sides to the coin. I fully agree with you that there is a lot of threats to the space if you really don't follow science. But there's also a lot of knowledge that is sitting within the VC sphere that can be helpful. Let me elaborate on this. On one hand, what we have seen in the last 12 months has been a massive increase in people starting companies in the green tech field. This is great because we do need this innovation and we need it at scale. The problem is that if this innovation is not based on science, we're more likely to be solving problems with the usual marketing tactics that essentially do not necessarily deliver value, but maybe bring short-term returns and act on this hype, exactly as you say. That is a challenge, and I think if you look at it from the investment perspective, the challenge comes from the fact that some venture capital funds do not have a thesis. So they would be comparing apples and pears in a way. They would be looking into a software as a service platform similar to ours and then try to compare it to any other SaaS business that they've seen. Surely some of the KPIs are similar, but if you don't understand the semantics of what is going to make this business tick and be one that actually companies or individuals, whatever the business model is, pick, then you more likely are going to be deteriorating the value that the founder is creating because you're not going to be able to ask the questions that are going to benefit their growth. On the other side, though, what we see, especially in the Green Tech Alliance, where we now have 1,300 companies, is that a lot of businesses that are being set up in the green tech sphere are actually by people who come from academia, also a lot of people with scientific background or kind of domain-specific background that is not always aligned with the business acumen that is needed to build a scalable business. This is this side of the coin, which can certainly benefit a lot from the traditional business as usual knowledge within the tech sphere, where scaling technology somehow follows a similar pathway. In these cases, of course, like any VC knowledge is useful. So as a bottom line, I think the truth lies in between both. I think we're definitely seeing the threat of greenwashing, but what we need to spend our time on is really making sure we educate not only investors, but also the entrepreneurs on what actually is the value that is going to address climate change that ultimately is also going to make the most amount of money. Because essentially, for those that are doing greenwashing today, on one hand, they are doing something bad for the planet, maybe in the shorter term, but in the longer term, they're actually just wasting money.
Yeah, exactly. Wasting money also in the sense that, or maybe to put it in a positive note, that maybe that's the wasting money part, but if our audience also, if you look at the perspective of where the climate financing is going and the amount of that is growing, we must also take into account how much money is actually flowing into the VC sector, like in general, not only clean tech. That I think was also brought out in the earlier Clean Tech for Europe summit, that there's around 120 billion euros of VC funding into growth stage A, B, C, and compared to that, 11 billion euros in clean tech, that's simply peanuts. That's still not that. But what we do need in terms of boosting the commercialization of science, but commercialization of the startups as well, of scale-ups. Essentially a couple of things. So policy, EU policy that kind of directs the attitude of the nations towards their consumers, the corporates, the investment banks, etc. Then also the capital, or the kind of the capital need that is needed in the market. That's the second point. Do you see, like from last year, was there any kind of milestones or certain events or announcements or anything that kind of boosted this sector? Well, of course, COP26 was like one of them. But was there anything else that you saw that kind of brought up this huge growth in the trend in clean tech?
I think the whole year was a domino effect, and essentially there was definitely a massive boost by all the new policy frameworks that were announced by the EU. The EU taxonomy, as imperfect as it is, it's definitely a step in the right direction, where we're really looking to climate adaptation, biodiversity as topics that are defining the future of Europe. There was a lot of announcements of new funds. You mentioned a few of them. We have Plan A, World Fund, also 2150. And then after that, I think this also led to quite a lot of funding rounds happening within the space. All of these things combined together, I believe, increase the confidence of the different stakeholders that this space is not only there to stay, it's there to make money, it's there to satisfy essentially the needs of all the different stakeholders. And if someone is cynical and saying, I don't care about climate change, then last year was definitely the year where it was confirmed that this is an economically viable offer, that regardless of your sentiment related to science or climate change, is one which can deliver a lot of returns. So these are the things that definitely influence how today's reality looks, and I hope that 2022 is going to bring a lot of maturity in the way we speak about climate change. We passed the stage of just generally confirming that there is an issue, and hopefully it will also bring a level of maturity in identifying which industries need the fastest support to be able to transition to a more sustainable model.
That's very good that you're also brought in that the 2021 was like kind of the time for growing the popularity, kind of setting the ground, setting up your tent in a campfire, and then in 2022 actually starting to implement those novel technologies, novel innovations, on a larger scale. So while the popularity was growing in 2021 with the first investments, the huge first wave of investments into cleantech started and initiated, then in 2022, I can't even, because in my mind, I cannot grasp either that flow or that wave is gonna, increase or continue in the same curve. We're seeing a hockey stick, or we're rather looking at, moderate growth. Because in 2021, in Europe at least, a couple of mega deals was kind of leading the huge growth in investments, right? But in general terms, the investments remain the same if you take out the outliers.
I mean, the year already kicked off with a lot of positive announcements for the sustainability ecosystem. We have Backmarket that was announced just today with close to $500 million in funding. This is, for those that don't know from the audience, second-hand electronic devices marketplace. We have also Bolt that is a sweetheart of the Baltic region, where essentially we're talking about a mobility improvement, which is kind of to some extent sustainable as well for many of the options that they offer. And I think this year is going to be defined by these kinds of deals. So we're going to see a lot of maturity going away from the seed stages into Series A, into Series B, which is quite necessary because climate change is not going to be a space, or climate tech is not going to be a space that is going to be able to just solely optimize on traditional software solutions. We're only part of the ecosystem. We're only part of the kind of problem solving. We really actually need a lot of investments in hardware. So this year I also hope to see, beyond the increase in the money, beyond the maturity of the investments in the topics, also a lot of money going into hardware.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Hardware is super important as we're talking about the kind of commercialization of science. I'm going to, for a brief, come to the kind of life cycle of cleantech, or kind of cleantech sector itself. So by cleantech, we mean, energy production, food and agri-tech, buildings, efficiency, transportation, logistics, novel materials, ICT solutions as enablers, etc., etc. So cleantech, the kind of first wave of cleantech began in the kind of so the 2000s. And when in 2008, we were kind of hit with a crash, that kind of died. So there was no trust in cleantech because that required quite a lot of patient capital. Back then, yes, the investors knew that. There were quite a lot of incentives as well for the investors to kind of pitch in their money to lower the risks. But now, since 2008 and 2015, 14, there was kind of like a gap. That's when the IT sector, the ICT, was a bit more developed because it also provided a faster ROI for the investors, and was just attractive. And then in 2015-16, something called cleantech 2.0 began, right? Now, then we are talking about when these in 2015-16, when those entrepreneurs and startups started, they also already had this strong ICT sector as an enabler technology to put everything in play. You know, we're talking about AI, machine learning, crypto, etc., blockchain. But also quite a lot of hard tech or hardware and deep tech, meaning that essentially, if you regard clean tech or deep tech startups, which actually kind of develop some kind of a product, you know, hydrogen generators or solar roofs, their production development time takes a bit more time than developing an IT solution. Might not as well. Depends on the product or the service. So if we're looking at then 2015-16, I guess the product development would last around 5, maybe 10 years. So that also provides a very kind of positive note on the market that those startups that began in 2015-16 are now maturing, getting into the round A's that we have heard also from Estonia's side even. There are a couple of round A eligible cleantech startups in Estonia, and of course elsewhere a lot more. Where I was aiming with that, I don't even know, but that's maybe a very good knowledge for the audience as well. But actually, Lubomila, I wanted to ask, from the company's perspective, or from the corporate's perspective, what does it take for a company to become a net zero? Because you also wrote in your blog, it was a nice quote, it is not about the carbon neutrality or the one-off tree planting campaign. Becoming a sustainability pioneer takes people, consistency, and a plan that is broken down in small steps.
Thank you so much for mentioning this, because this is an important topic. Maybe I can just say a sentence about what you made as a statement, because I thought it was really important one. Actually, there's good news, but there's also bad news in the fact that it takes 10 years of usual development time. If we follow the statistics that the UN has given us, we have close to 10 years, even less so. Some of the negative assumptions are at 7, which essentially gives us not the usual time that we have seen in the tech industry to be able to come up with something, and then a lot of competitors come in the space, and then there's a bit of a battle, and then someone picks up and becomes like the dominant player. We don't have that time, and I think that's what differentiates the tech space and the green tech, clean tech space, where we really need to focus on collaboration and additionality, where essentially whatever solution is being created, it is added on to an ecosystem of other solutions. Because the truth is that we don't have enough time, or we don't have the resources. Also, sadly, we don't have the expertise and the time. There's enough statistics showing how there's at the moment a massive demand and lack of supply of ESG experts, of scientists doing this topic, because to be frank, there was not enough money into the space to hire that many people up until a few years ago. So obviously people didn't go into university to study climate change or sustainability at the scale where they do now, business studies and other types of maybe more lucrative labels. So I think you definitely delivered the good news that we have a generation of more mature companies that are going to enter the level of kind of stage where they are going to be viable value proposition for the economy. But we should not forget that we really don't have enough time, and the problems are so many. You mentioned all the topics which are fitting within the clean tech sphere. All of these actually require hundreds of different solutions, which have actually difference in terms of where is this product applied. Like if it's in a certain geography, it needs to be adapted to it. Then it's about legislation. It's about so many things need to be calculated in, and we just don't have time to really take the usual path for like market disbalances, which are flowing money into one particular topic and then forgetting about the rest of the challenges we have ahead. So I don't know if you wanna.
Yeah, exactly. No, I kind of resonated and kind of resonates back to the point that I was asking as well. I hope we are still live because our image is stuck, but I guess we're good. The fact that the experts are quite a lot lacking at the moment in terms of the taxonomy, the ESG policies. When suddenly the policy gets implemented or get pushed on to the financial institutions, for example, but also corporates and companies, then it's rather difficult for them to find the experts that actually know or even know what is an ESG. I studied environmental technology back in the university.
Wow.
Now I kind of resonate why I was learning that, right? If I would be an expert in these topics now, the environmental management systems and LCA, etc., I would be rather in a good position on the workforce, or kind of in the job market. I think everybody's kind of craving to have people with my expertise or people with the ESG knowledge and awareness in their companies. Yeah. So, but that's what Plan A is doing, right? You're kind of centralizing it. So, what does it take for a company to become a net zero?
Yeah, going to your question, this is actually quite of a big topic that can be dedicated into a whole event itself. But I would say the sentence you quoted really gives a good overview, and the bottom line is really willingness. I know it might sound to many quite qualitative, but the truth is that we've seen the biggest successes from our clients in the companies that really have put the topic of sustainability at the core of their strategy, or if it's not at the core of their strategy yet, they at least have dedicated the resources needed to that. And that is getting the tooling, having at least one person that is actually doing something on the topic. So it's not simply an outsourced activity where someone calculates something and gives you a carbon neutrality certificate. What it takes is, if we break it down into even more tangible steps, is first of all, setting up an agenda to actually achieve something within a year, then going into an analysis where you can gather data, see where you're standing in terms of your carbon footprint, in terms of just the general knowledge of the carbon, and also just any other environmental, social and governance performance of the company, and then setting a target on how you can improve. After that, there's a lot of pathways you can take. Some companies hire a consultant that really goes and implements this decarbonization ESG improvement strategy. In other cases, companies work with companies like ours, where we really do the whole calculation, the analysis, and then we automatically identify the best levers for improvement. And then we give suggestions that are really tangible, with even examples on how you can improve, what you can implement that can lead to percentage reduction in terms of CO2. And then the final one, which is kind of the most complex one, where we've seen it in still just a few companies, is where they decide really sustainability to be at the core of every single element of every single department that they have. And that's where you're talking about a case like Dell, for example, where they have a sustainability person in every single department, be it in product, be it in sales, where even how you communicate yourself is going through the filter of are we actually making sure that we're aligned to our values and our sustainability agenda.
Are we here talking about scope 3 kind of approach, or that's not that?
No, but no, it's not. So maybe just a step back. For those that don't know, scope 1, 2, and 3 is kind of the framework by which emissions get to be calculated. Scope 1 is facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is purchase services like electricity, heating, cooling, and then Scope 3 is the peripheral downstream and upstream activities. It could be investments for banks. It could be suppliers, be it like the water that someone drinks in the office, or some juice or something like that. Or it could be for a car producer, the particles that make up the car. So what you're referring to is kind of the deep down changes. What I more was explaining is actually to what depth do you want to embed sustainability in your organization? The most superficial way of doing it is really outsourcing it, and then you give to someone the task. Okay, just make us carbon neutral, or like calculate our emissions, and that's it. Um, this is not going to be even possible legally in the coming 12 months because there's new legislation that is coming in the EU that is going to limit companies to being able to make these claims. But that's kind of the first step and the first thing you can do. Just outsource this, and maybe someone gives you a bit of a strategy on how you can improve your emissions. The second one is when you really decide to put the resources in the organization on the topic. This could be hiring one person that is your sustainability manager or officer, and then for them to essentially develop a whole strategy for that. And then what I was giving as a final example is really this idea of having a comprehensive sustainability agenda that flows through the whole strategy of the company.
Mm-hmm. On what kind of position, or from what kind of position usually the companies approach Plan A? Are they knowledgeable, or are they rather kind of looking into that, hey, somebody asked us to, report these ESG things, you know what you do, maybe you can help us? Or rather they're, knowledgeable in this sector, they already know what they need, what they want from you, and then you can provide them with that? Or what's the kind of general awareness of the environmental and social governance topics in companies?
I think the scene has changed quite a lot over the last 12 months. If you would have asked me the same question in the beginning of 2021, I would have definitely told you our main job on daily basis is to educate people about climate change, about sustainability, about ESG, about the new legislation that is coming up. This has changed significantly, and we have seen actually a lot of knowledge that is existing in the market. People come to us with very specific expectations, but that is not the main group of businesses. I would say there's still a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of knowledge in certain markets, in certain geographies, but definitely there is a lot of room for improvement in that. And that's also part of our job whenever companies come to us, is to really engage them with the topic, because they might be confused. Someone, exactly as you say, ask them, hey, what exactly am I supposed to be doing? We know how to take them through this journey of understanding what they need to deliver on, and also to be able to become advocates for that. Because the worst thing is you deliver to someone a report and you're not able to even speak about it. So we balance between these two things, and in our engagement process, we definitely have the two sides considered and embedded into the steps that we take with companies. But the general, I would say, stage of the community, of the European scene, is that there's a lot more knowledge this year already, but last year as well, in comparison to 12 or 24 months ago.
Okay. I can see we have a question from the audience. So Samshri is asking, have you observed that magnitude of technology increasing, it's not preferable to dependency or over-dependency on technology, particularly in health and few other things human beings have to change way of living, food habits and many other things? I'm not pretty sure, maybe there's a few exclamation marks and points missing. But okay, let's take this question as dependency on technology. So are we technocrats or not? Do we believe in technology that's going to change the world in the future, or rather the general awareness that you talked at the moment as well, that the awareness among people, among companies, corporates is rising? So do we need to educate people, or we need to provide people with tools that they could use, simply, no hassle in their daily life, and without even them knowing, they're, turning the world into a better place? What do you think?
Technology is an incredibly powerful tool for us to be able to effectively optimize our pathway to improving the health of our planet. But by itself, it cannot do anything. And what I mean by this is that Plan A, for example, can develop the most powerful software in the world that calculates emissions, that tells you what is your optimal pathway to reduce these emissions, and literally serves you on a platter what exactly you need to do, which is kind of what we do with our clients. But if there's no willingness for these companies to shift something in the way they operate, they're never going to reduce their emissions because it's not about the technology calculating it and then reducing on its own. It's about also the shift maybe in the way you consider your suppliers. It's also about the policies that you have about the traveling within your team. Maybe you don't want them to fly anymore if it's about a flight that takes half an hour, 1 hour. This discussion was actually one that I had in COP26. I was speaking at the New York Times Climate Conference, and it was actually a debate with a lot of knowledgeable people on the two sides of the story, where we were debating was technology going to save us? And I think by what I just said, my answer is clear, but to stipulate further, what I also was arguing against was essentially this idea that we just need to scale direct air capture and then everything is going to be fine. At the moment, for example, direct air capture has the capacity to reduce or eliminate emissions the equivalent of 900 cars a year. Just India put up 1.5 million cars within, I think it was at a Q4, don't quote me on that one, but in a very short amount of time. That's outside of the scale of all the other countries that also go through this technological advancement. So we really need to be able to think of the magnitude of the problem, which is incredibly big. It requires a lot of stakeholders to be involved. It requires willingness, and it also requires depth of understanding of what technology is going to optimize our way, but also adoption of this technology.
Absolutely. And taking, for example, the DAO, the direct air capture, when you also think, then there's a huge machine sucking air and separating CO2 out of air. That actually provides the polluters, the big polluters, to keep their business as usual. Just they have big ventilation systems somewhere that is capturing the CO2, and that's why this technology and awareness have to go hand in hand. And just human beings still have, I hope, the kind of sense of survival. We need to take our logical minds into account while assessing that. But let's look into the future. So we have seen in 2021 and before that as well, as you mentioned, you also had to explain people what is environmental stuff, what is environmental awareness, why do we care, why do we need to care. Now, if you open BBC, Euronews, whatever news channel, every second topic is about climate change. So, us startups, NGOs, we don't have to, explain that environmental stuff anymore. So that's settled. By 2022, sorry, no more explaining about the environmental stuff. Now what? Is it implementation? What kind of technologies we are seeing that are pushing forward? Obviously, one is definitely what we discussed before, the CO2 capture, storage, utilization, ESGs from the corporate side. Would you pinpoint out any kind of specific technologies or categories, sectors out of climate tech?
So first of all, I would definitely still think that 2022 as well as the upcoming few years are going to require a lot of focus on education. I don't feel like we're anywhere close to a level where there's a universal alignment in what the climate agenda is. We still have quite of a Western focused perspective when we talk about climate, not necessarily you and I. We were at COP and we were discussing the global overview of the topic, but definitely in the European context, there's a Eurocentric approach to thinking how advanced the whole discussion is. Just go outside in the US, also in Asia, Africa, there's such a long way to go until people really put this on top of the agenda, because at this stage, climate change is still considered as a luxury problem to address that is only going to be there for those that have the money to have been able to solve everything else. because it's depicted from the actual impacts that it's going to have on the economy, on society, and so on. Going to your question in terms of the technology that we should focus on or this year, or at least what I feel is going to be trendy this year. One is going to be materials. I think we're finally getting to the stage where there is a demand for sustainable materials because consumers want them, but because also there's been an understanding of the possibilities of benefits in terms of increasing your revenue if you really start optimizing for more sustainable, biodegradable, basically better for the environment materials. The second one is, I think our industry is going to become a lot more industry topic specific. There's been just this general consideration of carbon accounting, and everyone is offering products for everyone, and everyone is offering products at full scope 3, totally impossible. And I think we finally are going to go past the stage, and there's going to be a way for even investors or corporates or businesses, as well as individuals, to be able to pick those that are visibly more knowledgeable, visibly more capable of going into the depth of the analysis, which is what we're going to need as preparation for the legislation that is kicking in the beginning of next year on a European level. And then a final one that I am super excited about on a personal level is biodiversity tech. So there is a lot of technology for wildlife poaching tracking. There is a lot of technology that is related to tracking extinction of species and so on. And finally, last year, the discussion moved away from like carbon is this thing that is, you know, we need to reduce, but it moved into a space where we're talking about we're part of this ecosystem, and the ecosystem is disbalanced. There's species that are dying out, but our health, our existence, and the capacity for us to benefit from natural resources is dependent on the existence of these species. How do we rebalance all of that? There's technology that is coming up for that, and we're super excited also to be part of a few projects that not yet announced. So these are the three things that I'm assuming we're going to see a lot more of in 2022.
Keeping definitely my eye on these same topics as well. The biodiversity aspect, I can surely relate to that, and it's interesting to see what's up your sleeves. There is one question as well that I see from Kairat. Do you see carbon offsetting as a valid sustainability strategy in the future, or how do you view the voluntary carbon credit market playing a role in companies' sustainability strategies?
Carbon offsetting to me is a historical heritage that we have because there was not too many tools and not necessarily a lot of willingness for the sustainability topic to be embedded in the way businesses were doing business. So it rather had to find an external source of impact that was positive, where companies would essentially compensate their emissions and then they'll continue business as usual, but then they would also contribute to some improvements. In that sense, I think offsetting is going to diminish in value in the next 5 to 10 years because companies are going to progressively start reducing their own emissions, but also embedding offsetting in their own supply chains, which is called insetting, where they essentially create projects that are within their supply chain that improve the livelihoods of their communities, of the workers that they have. Examples for that are already the activities of Earthworm Foundation. This is a fantastic organization we've partnered with, and essentially what they work on is really enabling large corporates to understand themselves as actors of change from within rather than from outside. So offsetting per se is not a bad concept. I think it's just gonna move into a field where it's embedded into the organization in terms of the impact that these projects make. And then second, as a second layer, it's really gonna be a lot more about decarbonization at scale and how do you actually translate a lot of the reduction or improvement activities of a company into these credit systems, which is kind of going to again move away from the offsetting as we know it today, but more how do you actually put value behind becoming more sustainable.
Very good answer. Yeah, it put me even thinking in different aspects as well. Okay, let's see. We do like to have people's questions in. Let's see. There's another one from Lisset. What percentage of climate techs starting in the last 10 years are successfully running a business now, and what's behind their success?
That sounds like a who wants to be a millionaire kind of question. Can I get 50-50? I think I think I wouldn't be able to speak with statistics that you can then quote me on, but I can definitely say that referring to what you were saying earlier, if we look at the last 10 years, then we're talking about the 2008, 11 kind of sphere where there was like still some residue from this climate tech 1.0 industry, which wasn't necessarily successful. A lot of people burned a lot of money, and China was able to essentially grasp a massive part of the renewable energy market, especially in the solar sector and also in the battery sector. And I think from today's perspective, there's probably like a handful of companies that left from that particular wave, but there's been a lot of innovation that has been progressively turning more tech focused. There's a lot of examples of companies that maybe had a bit of a more consultative model, which moved into a more tech one. There's definitely a lot of companies also that have moved away from 10 years of assessment, analysis, and now are actually deploying technology at scale. I would not be able to go into kind of giving examples of what is a success story, because in the tech scene, the truth is that 10 years is a lifetime, and it could also be no time. For some companies, 10 years is the time in which they do research and development. For other companies, for 10 years, they could have created by then 4 or 5 companies at the same time, and maybe even IPO'd a few. So if the context of the question is, can we rely that within 10 years we're going to be able to create success stories? I would say yes, and purely because of the fact that we don't have time, we don't have a choice, and for all the money that are now flowing from the VC into the climate tech sphere, we basically have to deliver. We all have to deliver, and we have to deliver, sadly, knowing that this is our one and only shot, essentially.
Does that mean that there's too much capital coming to the market, and there's not too much kind of innovations or places to bet your money to?
I'll go back to your question about greenwashing, because I think money are never going to be enough if they're going to the right projects, because the exercise of us becoming a sustainable society, a sustainable economy is big, and it's not going to be done purely by investing in the companies that shine in media and so on, and the ones that are visible. We're very lucky to be in this position, but having founded also the Green Tech Alliance, I know there's a lot of companies that are doing phenomenal stuff in the middle of Kenya that have no visibility and actually are doing the stuff that really is moving the needle on topics like wildfire, what I was mentioning, and topics like access to energy at scale. So the capital at bulk is absolutely welcomed. What I would definitely advise anyone that has capital to give is give money in the most intelligent way, where you develop a thesis that is specifically aligned to what science tells you. Because the truth is that nothing is going to scale if it's not in line with addressing climate change, because it might lead to some short-term returns, but then these are going to diminish purely for the fact that the rules of nature, or like the principles of nature, are going to apply to this tech industry in a way that we would not anticipate. I can speak with a lot of confidence about this.
So, in 2022, with Plan A, what kind of big plans do you have? We already know that you have a couple of tricks up your sleeves, which you probably cannot announce here. But what do you see going forward for Plan A?
So, for those of the people from the audience that follow us on social media, next week I'm going to be making 2 really big announcements on LinkedIn. So stay tuned, and I hope we can all celebrate, because I think one of them in particular can impact a lot of organizations and people as well. That's maybe on the shorter term, and then what's happening in the coming months is that we're kind of doubling the team. We're 70 people at the moment, so for anyone that is looking for a job, please get in touch.
Anybody looking for the job?
We actually have openings in all different departments, so there's a lot of opportunity for intelligent, driven, excited, and also planet-friendly people to join. We have a geographical expansion that is in the moment happening. We're opening an office in London as we speak. I'm going to be going there next week, and I'm super excited for the people that we're going to be announcing in London, which we've hired, and they're all phenomenal and super experienced in what they do. So really, it's going to put us in a very strong position in this particular country. We have some exciting announcements for the Baltics as well, and also for Scandinavia. And then kind of more on the product side of the story, we have quite a lot of work to be doing, and we're already kind of kicking off a lot of activities on the ESG policy and decarbonization side. But basically, there's a lot of new modules coming up on the platform that are going to be using a lot of machine learning capabilities to optimize the decarbonization journey of companies. The reporting is already automated, so that we have, but then connecting the dots between the two is also something we're working on.
Is your tool also applicable to startups?
Yeah, of course. We work with quite a few of them.
Okay.
We have kind of on the larger scale, like the N26s and the Grovers and the Trivaros of this planet, but we definitely have quite a lot of like micro organizations as well, and yeah, that's something we definitely support a lot on as well.
Okay. Every company is definitely going to need that in the future. So stay tuned. Watch for Lubomila's LinkedIn. There's going to be a lot of announcements there, as I saw. From Beamline's perspective, Beamline and Accelerator has an open call until Sunday this week, until 16th of January. So we are expecting startups in novel materials, bioresources, agriculture and food to apply, receive very founder-friendly financing, and work with us to help scale the impact of cleantech, and let's see what we can achieve together, and kind of grab a bite of this huge cleantech second coming. For our audience, if there's any questions still unanswered, we will do our best to answer them at the according channels, either Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube after the session, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. I have a hint, we're going to see on Friday. But then in Belgium. But I want to thank you, Lubomila, for joining, and everybody who is looking for work at the moment and who is eligible for apply for Plan A. They are expanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and goodbye.